Listen to it.
Yeah, there's no, I think it's good. We will see the stars. Sorry. No, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you already?
I just pushed it now.
Yeah, I could do it.
Next one, here.
So thanks for coming. Tonight we are going to talk about why independent creators are dependent. Do not hesitate to ask questions after the talk or discuss. Since we are in a small community, we can maybe be a bit performative.
Can we ask questions during the talk?
Yeah, sure. If you have if you are interested in some particular aspect, maybe I will just kind of announce it, and then you can, you can ask if you're interested in some particular thing, because I will basically present a bit of practical things that I did as a kind of let's say independent curator. So if you're interested in any particular project, then you can ask, and either we go in detail during the thing, or we try to remember it and then go in detail after I'm kind of concluded. Okay, so basically my name is Kuba Szreder. I mean, kind of and I'm kind of now based in Warsaw, in Poland. But I make my PhD as a kind of practitioner, practice-based PhD as a curator in curatorial studies at the School of the Arts in Loughborough University. Loughborough is a pretty small town in East Midlands in England. It's a campus kind of university, and basically they kind of provided me space and opportunities to conduct my studies. What is important in it is that this presentation, when we talked about what can I talk about today with Jesper and people organizing HANA, organizing Open Forum, we decided that best would be if it is a kind of let's say presentation of my current research, let's say. So it is a bit rambling, and as it is practice based, it is also a kind of a bit confessional. Possibly as artists or as potential artists, possibly this format of practice-based PhDs, which are not the kind of in theory kind of critical PhDs that you are talking about somebody else, or you try to build some sort of systemic argument. In practice-based, you are supposed, or I am supposed to provide, let's say, some sort of practical examples and practical solutions on which I base my dissertation. So let's say that this is my. This is going to be a general framework of my presentation. It's also that I'm talking not from this position of talking about somebody else or about some sort of abstract they. I'm talking from the position of we or I rather, and it's also talking about my own practice. What means that this is from the very situated and contingent kind of situation. It's not some sort of abstract things. It's usually related very deeply to my position as kind of independent curator. What means, of course, independent curation? We could argue. I will talk about it later on. I use this independent in kind of in brackets, as I think there are a lot of dependencies that we are exposed to as independent curators. But I think that these dependencies or contingencies to which we are exposed are not only specific for curators, but basically they are specific for freelancers. So different also quite a lot of artists do make projects, and project making as such is quite a popular mode of organization of production. Basically, I also come from what is important, maybe a couple of words of theoretical background from which I come from. It is more from, I've finished sociology at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow it's already a while ago. couple of years ago, but still, I think in terms of my thinking about art field and art scene in particular, it's somehow twisted by the sociological thrust and kind of a bit of radical disbelief in different mythologies which are perpetuating or disbelief or kind of like scrutiny or critical distance towards different type of practicalities that we are exposed to, asking about how they are historically constituted, how they are sociologically constructed, and so on. Because like I was interested in this art field theory by Pierre Bourdieu. I'm pretty sure that most of you somehow it rings a bell. You know, he was a French sociologist who committed quite a lot of critical studies about the art field, and art field as such is his concept, or at least he gave it like theoretical, quite a theoretical, not evaluation, developed it theoretically. He also talked about distinction, about how culture is, let's say, played in the kind of like in relation to the class systems which perpetuate our society, specifically about French one. But most interestingly for me, it is this kind of like much realistic and sociological understanding of the art field as a field which is somehow perpetuated by different power relations, different symbolic fights, which has always some kind of like real aspect, so like either economical or social. So they are not only kind of like, you know, if people are struggling about different styles or struggling about different concepts and so on, there are usually quite a lot of different things at play and not only this kind of idle talk of groups of specialists. And another frame that I kind of used, so this is maybe kind of like more maybe a bit general thing of mine in terms of this Bourdieuian situation, but also like, let's say, kind of way of thinking about the social reality. And then it's also important, the important thing which I use directly in my PhD is this Walter Benjamin's concept of artistic technique or literary technique as understood as a transformation of apparatus. If you are not, maybe I will just give it because maybe you are not kind of like aware of this particular aspect of Benjamin's work. Basically, in 1936, Walter Benjamin gave a lecture in, I think, Institute for Social Studies in Paris, because he already emigrated back then. He emigrated from Germany due to Nazism, and he gave this lecture about author as a producer, in which he kind of like depicted, let's say, the sort of like much realistic understanding, or like sort of like Marxist understanding of literary technique and specifically of literary apparatus, by saying that I mean, he starts, let's say, his lecture from this kind of like twist, in which he says we should not focus on what do authors say about the relations of productions of his own period, but how he is situated inside of these relations of production. So what he says is that like apparatus, in which everybody of us is somehow located, or relations of production, is a kind of like material, it's a set of material and social devices which are related to the system of producing and distributing culture. And his kind of like general thesis, not to get into too much into the details, is that this apparatus, as he calls it, with all these systems of producing and production and dissemination, which are defining who is author, how is he remunerated, you know, for which kind of audiences does he write, whether he's writing for independent publishers, or he's writing for the bourgeois press, and so on and so on. But this is much more important in terms of the political trust or political efficiency of the particular author, rather than let's say the content that he produces. So he gives examples of different people who are producing kind of this politically revolutionary content, but simply put it in the regular newspapers, in a kind of like what he says, like bourgeois apparatus of production. And he says that basically even back then in 30s, this bourgeois apparatus had a very huge potential for co-opting all this, let's say, revolutionary content and basically disabling any kind of political potential related to them. So what he postulates, taking as example Sergei Tertyakov and George Brecht, Bertolt Brecht, not conceptualist, but theatre maker, Bertolt Brecht, he says that authors, instead of simply providing revolutionary content for unchanged apparatus, they should revolutionize the very apparatus. What means they should change the ways in which culture is produced and disseminated. So, for example, or not the example of Tertyakov, he says that you should think about. He gives an example of early mass authorship, where Tertyakov was going to all these kolkhozes and sovkhozes, or like different types of small, of kind of like Soviets and so on, and then he asked people to be journalists and kind of like mass journalism of workers. Was an example of how to change category of who produces the contents and who actually has an access for tools for technical tools also of making pictures, of making like of making and also of describing their own situation. So this was his kind of like idea, and he kind of like develops this difference between technique as revolutionizing the apparatus, as changing the apparatus, and tendency as simply providing let's say revolutionary contents in unchanged apparatus. And definitely this kind of like idea of changing or tweaking or transforming the apparatus is very influential on me, and in terms of like how I think about the arts, for me it's quite important how they are produced, also especially from the curatorial perspective, and how entangled are specific ways of our operations, how entangled they are in the overall, let's say, social dynamics of contemporaneity, of contemporary capitalism, actually. So I'm interested in this figure of curator as technician, let's say, or as a way of trying to tweak and radicalize the apparatus of the curatorial apparatus, descending from like structural logics, disagreeing with different type of pressures, and testing the possibilities to negate sociological, economic, political conditions of curatorial production. So this is, let's say, the general thrust of what I'm trying to do. And also what I'm trying to do is there is this whole discussion about leaving the art field, or leaving, let's say, saying, oh, this is all corrupted, let's leave it, in this kind of let's say, an idea of some sort of ideological purity, which I do not believe in. In fact, I'm rather thinking about how to twist it from the inside. So while working on certain things, in particular in my situations, in using the apparatus of curatorial projects, how to try to disentangle different strings which are attached to it, but it's never a kind of finished situation. It's always working from inside, and it's always being entangled, and it's never saying that, okay, I'm on this kind of comfortable position, but I'm criticizing something from the outside. No, I'm tweaking it from the inside, but it's always a kind of a dirty job. I mean, you never can be keep the idea of yourself being a saint if you are exposed to this kind of situations. And in this sense, it's also quite interesting, this kind of concepts like smuggling or tactics, which you maybe know, Michel de Certeau had this kind of very famous difference between strategies and tactics. And tactics are basically the ways of operation which are adapted by people who are dominated in certain social structures, who do not have an ability or possibility to create and construct their environment. They are rather, as he said, exploiting structural pressures as opportunities. So this is a situation in which you are not capable, or you are nobody of us is really capable of changing, for example, the grant systems in which we operate, or how the art academies run, even though, of course, it is doable due to the collective, let's say, to our collective struggles. But on an individual level, we, let's say, encounter these situations as somehow given and as external constraints, but still, according to this idea of de Certeau, you find ways how to turn it to your own advantage. And this is also a kind of like let's say an angle from which I try to approach it. So what is this apparatus of curatorial projects? Because it maybe sounds all a bit abstract. So if I'm saying that I'm an independent curator, I use this independency in brackets, but still there is some sort of like, there is some sort of idea of that you are independent from something. Usually there is this kind of like idea that independent curators, or like freelancers, freelance because they disagree with, for example, like either sometimes they disagree with art market, or like they're distrustful towards it, or distrustful towards institutions, distrustful towards different ways of involvement in, let's say, like art bureaucracies, or like direct commercialization of your own work. At least this was definitely the case in my situation. In more general sense, it's also kind of like descent towards different type of like labor that is also available. If you are not a rich person, you can like work in the office, you can work in a corporation, you can work wherever. And usually both like different freelancers working, at least who I know, like in kind of like independent cultural producers, let's say, are usually having this ideas of somehow not agreeing with this kind of like division of time and spending time in this kind of like situations. But what do I really do, or what do we really do as freelancers if we are not independently wealthy? And if we do not have like a lot of money at our disposal, especially as curators, because you're operating in situations in which you do not work only individually, but it's always a collective undertaking. So it's always kind of like, it's always related to somehow assembling different people, resources, and so on. I usually try that people are paid, and you need to have quite a lot of money, in fact, at the end, to do your stuff. So you end up as a project maker, more or less, like a freelancer, or a kind of like independent curator, and that's why this independency in brackets. End up as a project maker, and the project making is a kind of like is a most, I would say, popularized currently way of organizing our production. What means project making? It means that you apply to different public bodies, or even or you write projects or applications also for different funders if you happen to have one, or even if you are not, even if you are working on in the art market or in the institutions, you are still kind of expected to divide the cultural production into a quite tangible assemblages of ideas, which has to have a theme, which has to have beginning and ending. They need to have a certain type of budget. They involve quite a lot of management. They involve quite a lot of strategizing, in a sense of trying to secure all these necessary resources, then organize them, and somehow have a kind of like final effect, which usually for different type of funding bodies has to be somehow accountable. So it needs to have a certain type of quotas, which you write usually in application, or I write in applications if I apply for public funding, and what is kind of like, and so it's kind of like, it also needs to be a bit predictable. So you need to say, okay, so this is how many people are going to come, this is how many productions you are going to have, this is somebody who I want to invite, and so on, so on, so on. It all sounds kind of reasonable, but in this reason there is a bit of like madness, or definitely bureaucratic madness, in a sense that it negates what we kind of like believe that the culture is about. Let's say in terms of experimentation, kind of like power of negation, a certain type of autonomy, and a certain type of processual developments of different types of ideas now needs to be kind of packaged as quiet, like as an assembly of different accountable smaller blocks of data. Because at the end, they also need to be comparable. So you need to produce something which is comparable to other projects, and different bodies, which are assessment bodies, are about to actually assess whether what you propose is more interesting than what others propose. Well, in terms of competition, it's quite normal. Still, it has a lot of different type of side effects, on which actually I'm going to actually focus in the next part, and what is very kind of like important in terms of this to grasp, let's say, the whole picture, is that this kind of like grant systems and project making, so like means tested ways of supporting culture, is something which became popularized in the West more or less since 80s, 90s, especially 90s, and also replaced different type of long-term stipends and different type of long-term welfare systems, which were constituted on the bit different set of principles, and the progression of this kind of like project making, let's say, as a certain type of tendency, paralleled the general, let's say, no-liberalization of the Western economies, and the general kind of like totalizing tendencies of this are like this drive for efficiency, for productivity, for certain type of bureaucracy which accounts all these things, and also for the commercialization of different types of different spheres of human activity, which are seen as a potential sources of revenues, and even if they are not commercialized directly, still in terms of like how state operates, there is a huge expectation that there are going to be this kind of like objective assessment criteria, kind of like benchmarking as a way of and ratings as a way of controlling different types of human activities. They usually start in kind of like spheres of like enterprises and business, and then they are, let's say, transposed and transferred to the different fields, including arts. And the last also talked about like something which he talked like about societies of control. What he means is that like in the kind of industrial societies, which were dominated by different type of disciplinary institutions, like hospitals, barracks, schools, factories. In postmodern, let's say, societies, all this social control is diffused in different micro-mechanisms, and it's also absorbed, in a sense that it's not something external, but it is very internalized as our way of thinking about the world, our way of thinking about us in the world and about others in the world, how we compete with each other, and what kind of stakes we believe are at play. Okay, so from this general thing, let's get into the different, let's say, aspects. Let's see how many of them I'm able to kind of depict. One is grant art. There is a kind of question of short-termism and autonomy, logic of network, and the kind of like huge one is a question of authorship and maybe our division of labor. I'm not sure whether I will manage to make this, but let's say because it's a huge discussion, still. Maybe this kind of like starting from the grant art. So what is a practical controversy? Practical controversy is that securing resources leads to dependency on public funding, exposure to application procedures, and grant administration. Which what I already said a bit. What it actually means in practice, I will just show you one project and tell you maybe a bit of the story related to this. It's a project that we did in 2009 in Warsaw. But basically, what it means, we talked today also on the seminar about the problem. that different grant administrators have power over not only forms in which we work, but also about the contents that we kind of like try to do. So there are like different types of, because of the how cultural policy is being organized. In Poland, it is very frequently related to the different, more or less silly ideas that cultural bureaucrats have in the current moment about what should be the next hot thing in the arts, and or like how artists could be actually instrumentalized for the different type of duties that cultural administrators would like to believe them that they are capable of fulfilling. In England, it was a whole debate about instrumentalization of arts in cultural-led regeneration, where artists are supposed to kind of like gentrify different areas, bettering, kind of beautifying the neighborhoods, bringing in new people, but also kind of like working against social exclusion and making all these good deeds which social policy was incapable of delivering. In this particular case that I'm going to talk about, in this project about disappearing at the riverbank, it was basically the concept of the concept of Warsaw bureaucrats that that they wanted to commission artists to work at the kind of desolate riverbanks in Warsaw, as through Warsaw flows the river, which is somehow cut from the city, which is a big urbanistic problem. So instead of addressing the problem, which is that there is like a huge street built near the riverbank, they had an idea that instead they are going to invite artists to make a couple of funny commissions, and artists are going to promote this side of the river as a lively kind of like cultural zone, which will bring in people, and later on will bring in businesses, etc., etc. I'm going to talk about this. So basically, what we did, and this is like one of the ways how we can approach this situation, is that we kind of like made fun out of these ideas, and we told them that instead of like that we are going to commission artists, but we are going to commission artists to disappear, to become invisible at the riverbank. So we kind of like twisted the initial invitation, or the initial kind of like grant system, by commissioning artists to disappear, and only because of the kind of like small crack in the system, as there was a kind of like peer-reviewed application process, which is usually not the case in Poland. We actually were granted like 50,000 euros to commission different artists to disappear, and created a kind of like autonomous zone in this kind of like grant-driven application processes, in which by dissenting from the inside we got these resources, so we were capable of doing it, and actually artists had money to produce different art pieces. We were capable of, and actually by providing this kind of like freedom to artists, we not only made fun out of the very kind of like the very strange idea of asking artists to promote this kind of like riverbanks, but also managed to commission quite a lot of extremely interesting art pieces. Like some people referred to this kind of land art tradition. So this is like somewhere, you know, this is like the kind of like small here. Oh, okay. Here, it's called Me or I, and so it was only visible from air, and it was a kind of like commission for a photo. This is work by Paweł Althammer, who built a kind of golden gondola and placed it on this very small part of the river near one of the blockhouses. This was a kind of, it was supposed to be a kind of like ice plate, which was supposed to flow in the river with this kind of flag, but at the end it ended up with this kind of like small bit of snow flowing there. And different. So this is like this is like one artist from Warsaw, Natalia. She made this Predator. Maybe you can see it's like semi-invisible costume of this, of this like Predators with movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, of this kind of like semi-invisible creature which sneaks at the river banks, and basically we kind of like twisted all these ideas about what the public art should be, that it should be about like audiences, should be about visibility, should be about promotion.